Okay, a little bit more story time. See if I can keep this under an hour. Marcellus ate his breakfast alone, Rebecca attentive but uncommunicative. He had ventured upon several commonplace remarks to which she had replied amiably enough in listless monosyllables. Yes, Jonathan and his grandfather had had their breakfast early. No, she didn't think they would be gone long. After he had eaten, Marcellus returned to the tent and continued writing the letter he had begun to Demetrius, writing it in Greek, with no plans for its delivery. Everybody who was likely to be journeying to Jerusalem at this season had already gone. Presently Justus appeared at the tent door. Marcellus signed him to come in, and he eased himself onto a camp chair. "Well," Marcellus began, breaking a lengthy silence, "I suppose little Jonathan has done a generous deed, and broken his heart. I'm sorry to have caused him so much distress." "Do not reproach yourself, Marcellus. It may turn out well. True, the child is a bit young to be put to such a severe test. We can only wait and see how he behaves. This is a great day for Jonathan, if he can see it through." Justus was proud, but troubled. "See it through?" exclaimed Marcellus. "But he has seen it through. Hasn't he given his donkey to the crippled lad? You don't think he may repent of his gallantry and ask Thomas to give the donkey back, do you?" No, not that. But they're all down there on the corner telling Jonathan what a fine little fellow he is. You should have heard them when Thomas and his mother set off. Thomas riding the donkey and his mother walking alongside, so happy she was crying, and all the women caressing Jonathan and saying, "How sweet, how kind, how brave." Justus sighed deeply. It was too bad. But of course, I couldn't rebuke them. I came away. "But, Justus," exclaimed Marcellus, "surely it's only natural that the neighbors should praise Jonathan for what he did. It was no small sacrifice for a little boy. Isn't it right that the child should be commended?" "Commended, yes," agreed Justus, "but not praised overmuch. As you have said, this thing has cost Jonathan a high price. He has a right to be rewarded for it, in his heart. It would be a great pity if all he gets out of it is smugness. There is no vanity so damaging to a man's character as pride over his good deeds. Let him be proud of his muscles, his fleetness, his strength, his face, his marksmanship, his craftsmanship, his endurance. These are the common frailties that beset us all. But when a man becomes vain of his goodness, it's a great tragedy. My boy is very young and inexperienced. He could be so easily ruined by self-righteousness, almost without realizing what ailed him." "I see what you mean," declared Marcellus. "I agree with you. This thing will either make Jonathan strong, beyond his years, or it will make a little prig out of him. Justus, let's go out there before the neighbors have had a chance to ruin him. We'll take him along with us. What do you say?" Justus's eyes lighted. He nodded in enthusiastic approval. "I shall speak with his mother," he said. "We will pack up and leave at once." "That's sensible," said Marcellus. "I was afraid you might insist on Jonathan's remaining here just to see how much of this punishment he could take." "No," said Justus. "It wouldn't be fair to overload the little fellow. He has done very well indeed. It is time now that we gave him a helping hand. We too have some obligations in this case, my friend." "You're right." Marcellus began rolling up the letter he had just finished. "I got Jonathan into this mess, and I'll do my best to help him through it without being damaged." Justus had no more than had time to enter the house until Jonathan put in an appearance at the door of the tent, wearing the wan, tremulous smile of a patient burden-bearer. "Hi, Jonathan," greeted Marcellus noisily. "I hear you got young Thomas started on his way. That's good. What do you want with a donkey anyhow? You have two of the best legs in town." Busily preoccupied with the blankets he was folding up and stuffing into a pack saddle, he absently chattered on, half to himself. "A boy who was once a cripple, and then was cured, should be so glad he could walk that he'd never want to ride." "But Jasper was such a nice donkey," replied Jonathan, biting his lip. Everybody said they didn't know how I could give him up." "Well, never mind what everybody said," barked Marcellus. "Don't let that spoil it for you now. You're a stout little fellow, and that's the end of it. Here, blow your nose, and give me a hand on this strap." Justice showed up in time to hear the last of it. He winced and grinned. "Jonathan," he said, "we're going to take you with us on a few days' journey. Your mother's packing some things for you." "Me? I'm going along?" squealed Jonathan. "Oh!" He raced around the corner of the tent, shouting gleefully. Justice and Marcellus exchanged sober glances. "That was a brutal thing I did just now," muttered Marcellus. "Faithful are the wounds of a friend," said Justice. "Jonathan will recover. He already had something new to think about, now that he's going with us. By the way, Justice, where are we going?" "I had thought of Capernaum next." "That can wait. We might overtake Thomas and Jasper. We don't want to see any more of them today. Let's go back to Cana. It will do Jonathan good to have a look at Miriam." Justice tried to conceal a broad grin by tugging at his beard. "Perhaps it would do you good too, Marcellus," he ventured. "But will you not be wasting your time? We have seen everything there is for sale in Cana." Suddenly Marcellus, who had been tossing camp equipment into a wicker box, straightened up and looked Justice squarely in the eyes. "I think I've bought all the homespun I want," he announced bluntly. "What I've been learning about this Jesus has made me curious to hear more. Wonder if you'll help me meet a few people who knew him, people who might be willing to talk about him." "That would be difficult," said Justice frankly. "Our people have no reasons for feeling that they can talk freely with Romans. They would find it hard to understand why a man of your nation should be making inquiries about Jesus. Perhaps you're not aware that the Romans put him to death. Maybe you do not know that the legionaries, especially in Jerusalem, are on the alert for any signs that the friends of Jesus are organized." "Do you suspect me of being a spy, Justice?" asked Marcellus bluntly. "No, I do not think you're a spy. I do not know what you are, Marcellus, but I am confident that you have no evil intent. I should be willing to tell you some things about Jesus." "Thank you, Justice." Marcellus drew from his tunic the letter he had written. "Tell me, how may I send this to Jerusalem?" Justice frowned, eyeing the scroll suspiciously. "There's a Roman fort at Capernaum," he muttered. "Doubtless they have messengers going back and forth every few days." Marcellus handed him the scroll and pointed to the address. "I do not want this letter handled through the Capernaum fort," he said, "or the insula at Jerusalem. It must be delivered by a trusted messenger into the care of the Greek Stephanos at Ben Joseph's shop." "So you do know that slave, Demetrius," commented Justice. "I thought as much." "Yes. He's my slave." "I wondered about that, too." "Indeed? Well, what else have you wondered about? Let's clean it all up while we're at it." "I wondered what your purpose was for making this trip into Galilee," said Justice, brightening a little. "Well, now you know, don't you?" "I'm not sure that I do." Justice laid a hand on Marcellus's arm. "Tell me this. Did you ever hear Jesus? Or ever hear him talk?" "Yes," admitted Marcellus. "But I could not understand what he said. At the time I did not know the language." "Did you study Aramaic so you could learn something about him?" "Yes, I had no other interest in it." "Let me ask one more question." Justice lowered his voice. "Are you one of us?" "That's what I came up here to find out," said Marcellus. "Will you help me?" "As much as I can," agreed Justice. "As much as you are able to comprehend." Marcellus looked puzzled. "Do you mean there are some mysteries here that I'm not bright enough to understand?" he demanded soberly. "Bright enough, yes," rejoined Justice, "but an understanding of Jesus is not a mere matter of intelligence. Some of this story has to be accepted by faith." Faith comes hard with me, frowned Marcellus. I'm not superstitious. So much the better, declared Justice. The higher the price you have to pay, the more you will cherish what you get. Impulsively throwing aside his coat, he began pulling up tent stakes. We will talk more about this later, he said. It is time we were on our way if we hope to reach Cana by sunset. Suddenly he straightened with a new idea. I have it, he exclaimed. We will go to Nazareth. It's much nearer than Cana. Nazareth was Jesus' hometown. His mother lives there still. She will not hesitate to talk freely with you. When she learns that you, a Roman, saw her son and were so impressed that you wanted to know more about him, she will tell you everything. No, no, said Marcellus, wincing. I have no wish to see her. Noting the sudden perplexity on Justice's face, he added, I feel sure she would not want to talk about her son to a Roman. For the first 3 miles, Jonathan frolicked about the little caravan with all the aimless extravagance of a frisky pup, dashing on ahead, inexpertly throwing stones at the crows, making many brief excursions into the fields. But as the sun rose higher, his wild enthusiasm came under better control. Now he was content to walk sedately beside his grandfather, taking long strides and feeling very manly. After a while, he took his grandfather's hand and shortened his steps at the request of his aching legs. Preoccupied with their conversation, which was weighty, Justice had been only vaguely aware of the little boy's weariness, but when he stumbled and nearly fell, they all drew up into the shade, unloaded the pack train, and reapportioned their burden so that the smallest donkey might be free for a rider. Jonathan made no protest when they lifted him up. I wish I had kept that nice saddle, he repined. No, you don't, drawled Marcellus. When you give anything away, make a good job of it. Don't skimp. Our friend speaks truly, my boy, said Justice. The donkey will carry you safely without a saddle. Let us move on, and when the sun is directly overhead, we will have something to eat. I'm hungry now, murmured Jonathan. The bread will taste better at noon, advised Justice. I'm hungry too, intervened Marcellus mercifully. As he unstrapped the hamper, he added, out of the corner of his mouth, He's only a baby, Justice. Don't be too hard on him. Justice grumbled a little over the delay and the breakdown of discipline, but it was easy to see that he had been mellowed by Marcellus's gentle defense of the child. A token lunch was passed about, and presently they were on the highway again. You would have been delighted with the mind of Jesus, said Justice companionably. You have a generous heart, Marcellus. How often he talked about generosity. In his opinion, there was nothing meaner than a mean gift. But the worst thing a man could do to himself or a fellow creature was to bestow a grudged gift. It was very hard on a man's character to give away something that should have been thrown away. That much of Jesus' teachings you could accept, my friend, without any difficulty. That's a friendly comment, Justice, but you do me too much credit, protested Marcellus. The fact is, I have never in my life given anything away that impoverished me in the least. I've never given anything away that I needed or wanted to keep. I suppose Jesus parted with everything he had. Everything, said Justice. He had nothing but the garments he wore. He held that if a man had 2 coats, he should give one away. During his last year with us, he wore a good robe. Perhaps he would have given that away too, if it hadn't been given to him in peculiar circumstances. Would you like to tell me about it? Asked Marcellus. There was an ill-favored woman in Nazareth who was suspected of practicing witchcraft. She was a dwarfish person with an ugly countenance, and walked alone, friendless and bitter. The children cried after her on the road, and so a legend spread that Tamar had an evil eye. One Sabbath day, the neighbors heard her loom banging and warned her against this breaking of the law, for many of our people have more respect for the Sabbath than they have for one another. Tamar did not heed this warning, and she was reported to the authorities, who came in upon her on a Sabbath morning and destroyed her loom, which was her living. Perhaps you can guess the rest of the story. It was fortunate for Tamar that Jesus was a good carpenter, remarked Marcellus. But what did the authorities think of his coming to Tamar's aid? Did they accuse him of being sympathetic with Sabbath breakers? That they did, declared Justice. It was at a time when the priests were on the alert to find him at fault. The people often urged him to speak in the village synagogues, and this displeased the rabbis. They were always haranguing the people about their tithes and sacrificial offerings. Jesus talked about friendship and hospitality to strangers and relief for the poor. But didn't the rabbis believe in friendship and charity? Wondered Marcellus. Oh, yes, of course. They took it for granted that everybody was agreed on that. In theory, at least, surmised Marcellus. Exactly, in theory. But securing funds to support the synagogue, that was practical. They had to talk constantly about money. It left them no time to talk about the things of the Spirit. Well, go on about Tamar, interposed Marcellus. I suppose Jesus reconstructed her loom and then she wove him the robe? Right. And he wore it till he died. Were you there when he died? Asked Marcellus uneasily. No, I was in prison. Justice seemed disinclined to enlarge upon this matter, but when questioned, told the story briefly. A few days before his trial for treason and disturbing the peace, Jesus had impulsively driven hucksters and bankers out of the temple. Several of his friends had been arrested and thrown into prison on the charge of having gathered up some of the scattered coins from the pavement. The accusation was untrue, Justice insisted, but they were kept in prison for a fortnight. Which, by the way, a fortnight is 2 weeks. It was all over, he said sadly, when we were released. As for the robe, the Roman soldiers gambled for it and carried it away with them. We have often wondered what became of it. It could have no value for them. It was noon now, and a halt was made in a little grove where there was a spring and a green grass plot for grazing. The donkeys were unburdened and tethered. The food was unpacked: a wineskin, a basket of bread, a parcel of smoked fish, an earthenware jar of cooked barley, a box of sun-cured figs. They spread the blanket on the ground for little Jonathan, who, stuffed to repletion and wearied by the journey, promptly tumbled down to sleep. Justice and Marcellus, lounging on the grass, pursued a low-voiced conversation. We'll stop there.